Everyone has been told that ego is the problem. You have heard it in therapy. You have read it in self-help books. You have seen it on motivational posters. Kill the ego. Dissolve the self. Let go of the need to be right, to be seen, to be special. The ego, you have been told, is the obstacle. The thing standing between you and peace, between you and connection, between you and the life you actually want. But what if that is only half the story? What if the ego is not just a flaw in your psychology, but one of the most sophisticated survival tools ever developed by the human mind? What if the thing you have been taught to destroy is also the thing that built civilization, drove exploration, created art, and kept your ancestors alive long enough to become you? The truth about ego is stranger and more useful than anyone has told you. Your ego did not appear by accident. It was built by evolution over hundreds of thousands of years, shaped by the specific pressures of living in a social group, where your status, your reputation, and your sense of self directly determined whether you ate, whether you mated, and whether you survived. The ego is not a bug, it is a feature. And understanding what it was built to do is the first step to understanding why it sometimes destroys the very things it was designed to protect. The word ego comes from the Latin for I. Sigmund Freud used it to describe the part of the mind that mediates between the raw impulses of the unconscious and the demands of the external world. But the psychological concept of ego, as most people use it today, is something broader. It is your sense of self. The story you tell about who you are. The mental model that says, this is me, this matters to me, this threatens me, this is mine. And that mental model, it turns out, is doing an enormous amount of work. Psychologist Roy Baumeister at the University of Queensland has spent decades studying the self and its functions. His research shows that the ego, the conscious self, serves 4 primary functions that are essential to human survival and flourishing. It organizes information about who you are and what you are capable of. It regulates your behavior in social situations. It allows you to make long-range plans by projecting your current self into an imagined future. And it manages your reputation, the way other people perceive and respond to you. Every one of these functions was critical in the ancestral environment. A creature with no sense of self cannot learn from its own past. It cannot project itself into the future and plan. It cannot modulate its behavior to maintain social relationships. And it cannot track its standing in a group, which in the ancestral world was not a matter of social comfort, but of survival. This is where the ego reveals its deepest evolutionary roots. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm at the University of Southern California has studied social hierarchies in hunter-gatherer societies across the globe. His research shows that for most of human prehistory, our ancestors lived in what he calls reverse dominance hierarchies, groups where the collective actively suppressed the dominance attempts of any single individual who tried to seize too much power or resources. In these groups, reputation was everything. A person known as generous, skilled, brave, and fair had access to food, mates, alliances, and protection. A person known as selfish, cowardly, or dishonest was shunned, ostracized, or worse. In that world, your ego, your active management of how others perceived you, was not vanity. It was survival infrastructure. The ego's drive to be seen, to be valued, to be respected, to defend itself when attacked. These are not character flaws. They are the output of a system that was doing exactly what it evolved to do, maintaining your social standing in a group of 50 or 100 people who held your life in their hands. But here is where it gets complicated. The world you live in now is not a band of 50 people on the African savannah. It is a world of 7 billion strangers, anonymous social media feeds, career ladders, traffic jams, and news cycles. And the ego you inherited from your ancestors did not get the memo. It is still running its ancient social survival software in a context it was never designed for. This is why ego causes so much damage in modern life. When someone criticizes your work in a meeting, Your ego responds as if your standing in the tribe is under threat. When someone else gets promoted ahead of you, your ego registers it as a status loss with the same emotional weight as losing access to food. When a stranger disagrees with you on the internet, your ego mobilizes the same defensive machinery it would have deployed against a rival, challenging your place in the group. The stakes are no longer what they were, but the system does not know that. Psychologist Mark Leary at Duke University developed what he calls the sociometer theory of self-esteem. His research showed that self-esteem is not primarily about how good you feel about yourself in an abstract sense. It is a real-time gauge of your social acceptance, a built-in monitor that tracks how included, valued, and respected you are by the people around you. When the sociometer reads low, the ego mobilizes. It seeks validation. It defends against criticism. It competes for status. When the sociometer reads high, the ego relaxes, and the person becomes more generous, more open, more creative. Self-esteem, in other words, is not the destination. It is the dashboard, and the ego is the driver. This reframe changes everything about how you relate to your own ego. Instead of seeing it as an enemy to be destroyed, you can begin to see it as a tool to be understood. A tool with a specific design, specific strengths, and specific failure modes. A tool that works beautifully in some contexts and catastrophically in others. The hidden power of the ego is this. When it is functioning well, it is the engine of almost everything humans have ever achieved. The ego that says, I am capable of more than this, has driven every human who ever pushed past the limits of what was thought possible. The ego that says my work matters and deserves to be seen has produced every painting, every symphony, every building, every book that has ever moved another human being. The ego that says I will not be treated this way has fueled every social movement that has ever changed the course of history. The ego that says I can figure this out has kept people alive in conditions that should have killed them. The problem is not having an ego. The problem is having an ego that is running unconsciously, reacting to the modern world with the ancient social survival software of a creature living in a small tribe on the savannah. The solution is not to kill the ego. The solution is to understand it so clearly that you become its driver rather than its passenger. Philosopher and psychologist William James, writing in the late 19th century, described the self as having multiple layers: the material self, the social self, and the spiritual self. The social self, he argued, is the one most people live in almost entirely. The self that exists in the eyes of others, that rises and falls with approval and disapproval, that works constantly to manage the impression it makes on the world. Most of the suffering associated with ego comes from being trapped in the social self, from mistaking the map for the territory, from confusing the story of who you are with who you actually are. The hidden power of the ego lies not in eliminating it, but in learning to hold it lightly, to see it clearly enough to know when it is helping you and when it is running an ancient subroutine that has no relevance to your actual life. To use its drive for recognition as fuel without being enslaved by it. To let its need for self-definition give you direction without letting it make you rigid. To allow its protective function to keep you safe without letting it keep you small. Your ego built the world you live in. Every invention, every institution, every breakthrough in human knowledge came from a mind that believed its perspective mattered. That belief is the ego. And without it, nothing gets made, nothing gets built, nothing gets changed. The next time you feel it flare, the defensiveness, the need to be right, the sting of being overlooked, do not try to kill it. Try to understand what it is protecting. Try to ask whether the threat it has detected is real or ancient. Try to use its energy rather than fight it. The ego is not your enemy. It is your oldest, strangest, most powerful ally. And like any powerful ally, it works best when you understand it rather than fear it.